Hey, you finally found what you were looking for. As you listen to my voice and feel the gentle frequencies in the background, you'll notice your body beginning to sink deeper into your bed. Each breath slower, each muscle softer, and with every word, your thoughts become quieter. You can let go now. You can rest. This is your journey. Welcome to Dreams of Duty. Now, before we begin this journey, take a moment just to breathe. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air fill your chest and breathe out, letting everything go. Again, breathe in and breathe out. Each time, a little deeper, a little calmer. With every breath, your body softens, your thoughts drift further away, and the world outside becomes distant and quiet. You are safe here. You are calm. You are ready to dream. It's November 2019-44. The Philippine Sea stretches endlessly, a dark expanse of cold, restless water. Mist hangs low over the waves, and the moon casts a faint silver sheen, reflecting like liquid metal on the restless surface. Underneath, the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-47 pushes forward slowly, slicing through the water with a metallic whisper, almost unnoticed by the world above. Inside, Lieutenant Sekio Nishina sits alone, the dim light from the control panels casting long shadows across the cramped interior. In his hands rests a small, simple urn, the ashes of his old friend Hiroshi Kuroki. The silence is almost unbearable, broken only by the faint hum of the submarine's engine and the occasional creak of metal under pressure. He stares at the urn, tracing the smooth surface with a finger. A lifetime of memories flickers across his mind. Laughter shared in the officers' quarters, the long nights of training, their secret sketches, and whispered dreams of a weapon that could turn the tide of war. The captain's voice crackles over the intercom. "Nishina, we have reached the coordinates. You know what comes next." He nods, barely moving, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him like the ocean above. Carefully, he stands and walks towards the hatch, each step measured, every sound magnified in the silence of the submarine. On the deck, the open hatch gapes like a dark mouth, waiting to swallow him. Inside the hatch lies the Kaiten, a manned torpedo, a sleek, deadly machine built for one purpose: to deliver destruction at the cost of the pilot's life. Every rivet, every dial, every lever was meticulously designed by Nishina himself. He lowers himself into the cockpit, feeling the tight embrace of the controls around him. The machine feels alive, almost breathing beneath his hands. It is the culmination of years of secret work, of hope and despair intertwined. He places the urn beside him, careful not to disturb it, and begins a methodical check of every mechanism. The dials click under his fingers, valves hiss softly, and the rudimentary autopilot hums with latent energy. "This is beautiful, my beauty," he whispers, not out of vanity, but because the machine represents the ultimate expression of his craft and his devotion. The captain reports again over the radio, his voice steady, almost ceremonial. Targets are anchored 4.5 miles ahead. You are clear to proceed. Nishina takes a deep breath, steadying his pulse. The kaiten latches release with a soft, mechanical sigh. The torpedo slips into the water, disappearing beneath the waves like a shadow in motion. Each kaiten is on a slightly different path, programmed to approach their targets stealthily. The water closes over Nishina's machine, isolating him in a world of darkness, pressure, and unspoken anticipation. He maneuvers carefully, avoiding shallow banks, adjusting depth with a delicate touch, periscope raised only when necessary. He scans the distant silhouettes of enemy ships, anchored and unsuspecting. The USS Mississauga gleams faintly through the periscope, her steel hull a tempting target for the explosive payload he carries. His mind drifts momentarily to the past. June 1942, the disaster at Midway. The loss of 4 out of 6 carriers, the destruction of Japan's best pilots, the crushing reality that America's power only grew while Japan's advantage evaporated. He remembers the conversations with Hiroshi Kuroki, the sketches, the plans for a new kind of weapon, a pilot-guided torpedo, a chance to strike back when all else seemed lost. Their words echo in his mind. If we are to die, let us at least take one of them with us. The ocean around him is calm now, deceptive in its serenity. Beneath, the currents tug subtly, reminding him that the sea is indifferent to human ambition, indifferent to glory or sacrifice. The explosion of the first kaiten rocks the distant waters, a warning that the enemy is awake, yet Nishina presses on. He is alone, yet carries the presence of his friend with him, each heartbeat a rhythm of resolve. The hours of waiting, of slow, meticulous preparation, culminate in a single moment as he sets the final bearing and accelerates. The torpedo hums with power, slipping through the water at speeds that blur the line between man and machine. Every second stretches, the tension coiling tighter, the inevitability of fate pressing close. Above him, the stars are hidden behind clouds, the moonlight filtered through mist, painting the world in muted silver. Inside the cockpit, Nishina breathes steadily, feeling the cool metal against his palms, the vibrations of the engine beneath him. The urn of Hiroshi Kuroki rests beside him, a silent witness to this final journey. Every design choice, every calculation, every hour of labor leads to this moment. As the kaiten slices through the water, the world above seems distant, irrelevant. The mission is singular, absolute, and inescapable. For Nishina, the journey is both an act of war and a tribute, a promise fulfilled, a final testament to friendship, honor, and sacrifice. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon as Nishina maneuvered the kaiten beneath the quiet surface. The ocean seemed endless, a shifting canvas of dark blues and grays, with waves rolling silently above him, carrying the distant hum of life he could no longer reach. Every motion of the torpedo felt amplified in the narrow cockpit. The subtle tilt as he adjusted the rudder, the vibrations of the engine pulsing like a heartbeat through his body. He thought of the training missions, of the countless hours spent learning to feel the machine as an extension of himself. The early trials had been brutal, filled with miscalculations, near drownings, and mechanical failures that left pilots gasping for air and shaken to their cores. Hiroshi Kuroki's accident haunted him still, the memory of his friend trapped beneath the waves, writing his final words with steady resolve, reverberated like a somber drumbeat inside Nishina's mind. Now, alone and surrounded by water that stretched infinitely in all directions, Nishina was both pilot and passenger in this lethal creation. He checked the dials again, mechanically, almost ritualistically. Pressure gauges, rudimentary gyroscopes, the clock for timing turns, all had to be perfect. One misstep, one unnoticed rise in the current, and everything would be lost. Through the periscope, the American ships were visible, anchored in rows like unsuspecting giants in a calm sea. Their silhouettes were majestic yet ominous, and for a brief moment, Nishina was struck by their quiet power. Unaware of the deadly fate approaching from below, he set the final bearing on the rudimentary autopilot and allowed the Kaiten to glide, silent and unseen, through the dark waters, carrying the concentrated energy of a nation's desperation. Memories of his early days in the Navy floated through his mind. He remembered being a young officer, full of ambition, brimming with hope that honor and skill could change the tides of war. But the reality had been relentless. Battles lost, friends gone, strategies failing, and a homeland struggling against insurmountable odds. Yet, amidst the despair, there had been sparks of ingenuity, plans and ideas forged in whispered rooms and drawn in blood-stained sketches. The Kaiten had been born of that desperation, a weapon that could turn the courage of a single man into devastating power. He glanced at the small urn beside him again. Hiroshi's ashes seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim cockpit light, as if reminding him that he carried more than explosives and steel. He carried memory, loyalty, and a bond that transcended life itself. "I will not fail you," he whispered, the words swallowed by the hum of the torpedo and the endless pressure of the sea. The currents grew slightly stronger as he neared the target area. The depth fluctuated, the water pressing from all sides, an invisible hand reminding him of the fragility of human life. Nishina adjusted the controls carefully, feeling the subtle resistance of the torpedo against the sea, like riding a creature that is alive, responsive, and unpredictable. Suddenly, a distant explosion echoed through the water. The first Kaiten had encountered resistance depth charges rippling through the surface, alerting the enemy that something had breached their defenses. He felt a twinge of fear, but it was quickly tempered by focus. There was no turning back. The mission required unwavering resolve, and hesitation could mean death before the Kaiten even reached its target. Hours seemed to stretch as he glided silently, the underwater world around him a mosaic of shadows, light refracted by the faint sun above and the shifting waves. Every bubble from the compressed air tanks, every subtle sound of the engine, was a note in the tense symphony of his journey. Time became elastic minutes, stretching into eternity, every heartbeat echoing with the weight of purpose. He remembered the faces of the young pilots who had trained alongside him, each volunteer driven by loyalty and desperation. Thousands had come forward, yet only a select few had been chosen for this mission, each knowing the price of entry. The reality of their sacrifice, the courage required, pressed on him like the water around the Kaiten. Through the periscope, the Mississauga remained, almost serene, an immovable force of metal and purpose. Nishina aligned the torpedo carefully, measuring distance, current, and depth. The final approach required a delicate balance between speed and caution. He could feel the pressure of history upon him, a young man alone against the immense machinery of war, guided by duty and memory. As he powered the Kaiten forward, the cockpit vibrating with controlled energy, Nishina allowed himself a fleeting thought of hope. If this mission succeeded, the lives lost, the planning, the innovation, the grief would not be in vain. If it failed, at least he would have fulfilled his promise to his friend, a silent testament beneath the waves, a story of courage written in water and steel. Above, the sun began to rise, a faint glow barely touching the horizon, casting long reflections across the endless sea. Below, Nishina's world was one of shadow and purpose, where every decision was amplified, every movement measured, and every breath a reminder of mortality and honor. And so, the Kaiten glided forward, silent, deadly, a ghost in the depths, carrying within it the hopes, fears, and memories of those who dared to dream of victory when the odds were impossibly against them. The water around Nishina seemed almost alive, each subtle current tugging at the Kaiten, as if warning him of the weight of the task ahead. Through the periscope, the silhouettes of the American ships grew larger, their steel forms glinting faintly in the morning light. Every detail was visible now. The decks lined with sailors, the towering superstructures, the smokestacks wafting thin ribbons of haze into the sky. Inside the cramped cockpit, Nishina's hands were steady, though his heart beat with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, yet now, with life and death pressing against him from all sides, every memory, every training exercise, every whispered word from Hiroshi Kuroki came flooding back. The faint hum of the engine and the soft vibration of the hull became a rhythm he synchronized with, each pulse a countdown to destiny. He thought again of the first trials of the Kaiten, the treacherous training missions along the coast of Otsushima. He remembered the screams of the sea when Hiroshi's craft had been trapped, the helplessness of watching a friend wrestle with steel and water. The memory stung, yet it fueled his resolve. "I carry more than explosives," he whispered to himself. "I carry honor. I carry friendship. I carry the memory of those who gave everything." As the distance closed, the water grew shallower, and Nishina had to adjust constantly, rising and lowering the periscope, keeping the torpedo hidden from prying eyes. He could feel the tension of the crew aboard the nearby American ships they were searching, alert, yet unaware of the lethal shadow moving beneath them. Every moment of silence became almost deafening, the subtle creaks of the Kaiten amplified in his consciousness. Suddenly, a distant, muffled explosion vibrated through the water. One of the other Kaitens had struck a sandbar, triggering a chain reaction of alarms on the ships above. Nishina's pulse quickened, but he did not panic. He adjusted his depth carefully, slipping silently beneath the waves, almost invisible, a ghost among the currents. He could see the Mississauga now, her massive hull dominating his periscope's field of view. The engines hummed, the gyroscope clicked softly, and Nishina adjusted the course, aligning the torpedo with meticulous precision. Every calculation, every small correction mattered. A single misalignment could ruin the mission and extinguish all hope. Memories of his training with Kuroki and the other volunteers surged in his mind. They had laughed, argued, and cried together, each of them knowing the fatal risk of the mission, yet embracing it with unwavering determination. Thousands had volunteered, but only a few had been chosen. Each pilot handpicked for skill, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as Nishina edged closer. Beneath him, the pressures of the deep whispered warnings, reminding him of the fragility of flesh and steel against the ocean's relentless might. Above, the Americans moved in oblivion, unaware of the danger looming silently beneath their vessels. Every glance through the periscope brought the target closer, and with it, the weight of destiny pressed upon him. He allowed himself a brief moment to reflect on the philosophy that had guided him through the war. That honor was not measured by survival, but by action. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. That the bonds forged in friendship and shared struggle were stronger than the fear of death. Adjusting the rudder with precision, he guided the kaiten forward. The engines hummed a constant, low note, the water rushing past like the whisper of an invisible giant. He could see the decks of the Mississauga now, the sailors moving about unknowingly, living their mundane routines as history's shadow crept beneath them. And then, for a fleeting moment, Nishina allowed himself a human thought, a hope that somehow, through all the death and sacrifice, his action might change the course of a day, a battle, a war. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. He was no longer a boy, no longer a student. He was a pilot of a machine designed for one purpose. Every second, every motion, every breath carried the weight of responsibility, the certainty of mortality, and the invisible presence of his fallen friend. The ocean grew calm again, deceptively so, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. Nishina's focus narrowed to the task at hand, each adjustment calculated, each turn deliberate. Through the periscope, he could see the intricate patterns of ropes, lifeboats, and nets along the hull of the ship, subtle obstacles that could destroy the mission if misjudged. Every nuance mattered. In the silence beneath the waves, Nishina whispered Hiroshi's name once more. "I am with you, always." And with that, the kaiten surged forward, slicing through the water, carrying both men's hopes and the concentrated fury of a nation into the heart of the enemy. The tension in the water was palpable, a silent drumbeat echoing through the depths as Nishina guided the kaiten closer to the anchored fleet. The USS Mississauga loomed above, immense and unaware, her steel sides reflecting the faint shimmer of the morning Sunday. Every wave, every ripple, carried the distant echoes of the other kaiten's explosions, muffled alarms. The chaos of vessels struck and crews scrambling. Nishina's hands were steady, the familiar hum of the engine beneath him a lifeline in the overwhelming darkness. He adjusted the rudder with delicate precision, keeping the torpedo perfectly aligned with the target. The gyroscope ticked softly, measuring each infinitesimal change in course, while the clock reminded him of the final seconds slipping away. The cockpit was a cocoon of metal and memory, the urn of Hiroshi Kuroki beside him a constant, silent companion. Above, American sailors shouted, their voices carried faintly down through the water, unintelligible yet urgent. They had glimpsed the periscopes of other kaitens, some ensnared in nets, some destroyed by depth charges, and chaos reigned. But the Mississinawa, massive and impervious from their perspective, had yet to register the shadow gliding beneath her. The calm surface belied the deadly precision of the silent hunter approaching below. Nishina's mind wandered briefly to the past, the sketches he and Hiroshi had drawn in secrecy, the countless hours spent refining controls, testing dials, adjusting valves, perfecting a weapon that no one else could fully understand. Every trial, every accident, every failure had led to this singular moment. There was no room for error. There could be no hesitation. The periscope rose slightly, just enough to survey the hull and confirm the trajectory. Nishina's eyes scanned the intricate patterns of the ship's deck, lifeboats, ropes, cranes, and the faint glint of metal railings. Timing was everything. A fraction of a second too early or too late, and the torpedo could miss its mark, or worse, be destroyed before reaching the hull. The last miles of water slipped past like liquid eternity. Nishina inhaled slowly, feeling the pressure of the ocean around him, the mechanical hum beneath his hands, the weight of history pressing down from above. His thoughts returned to Hiroshi's death poem, written calmly after the accident during training, the words echoing in Nishina's mind. This brave man, so filled with love for his country that he finds it difficult to die, is calling out to his friends and about to die. Now Nishina was living those words, alone in the depths, yet carrying his friend's memory forward into the heart of battle. And then the moment arrived. The kaiten surged forward, the engine vibrating through Nishina's body as the target hull grew larger in the periscope. He adjusted the final rudder and fine-tuned depth, aligning the explosive payload directly beneath the center of the massive oiler. He closed his eyes for a brief instant, exhaling slowly, whispering a silent prayer to Hiroshi, to the Emperor, and to the unseen forces that had guided him here. The collision was sudden, violent, and total. The shock of impact rattled the hull, reverberating through the water in a muffled roar that felt simultaneously distant and immediate. The warhead detonated, sending a torrent of fire and steel ripping through the Mississinawa. The explosion tore through the tanks, igniting the fuel and creating a towering inferno that shot up from the water, smoke curling skyward in angry black tendrils. Secondary blasts followed, each successive fireball illuminating the anchorage with horrific brilliance, turning the calm morning into a scene of chaos and destruction. Above, sailors screamed, some thrown from decks, some diving for cover. The once proud vessel split, twisted, and sank, the hull groaning as it disappeared beneath the waves. The water churned violently, fragments of metal and flame scattering across the sea surface. In that moment, history had changed, not through vast fleets or grand strategies, but by the courage and precision of a single man beneath the waves. Nishina remained in the cockpit, feeling the vibrations of the explosion ripple through the torpedo, the immense force of the blast rolling over him in muted waves. He did not celebrate. There was no triumph. There was only the quiet, immense gravity of what had been done, and the understanding that this was the cost of honor, the weight of duty fulfilled at the ultimate price. In the distance, the submarine crew believed all four Kitons had succeeded. They reported back, unaware that only one had reached its mark. The false report would inspire further missions, yet history would remember the grim reality. Only 3 Kitons ever truly struck their targets, costing 106 young men their lives and claiming the lives of 187 Americans. But in that singular instant, Nishina had completed the mission he had trained for, prepared for, and hoped for. He had honored the memory of Hiroshi Kuroki, fulfilled their pact, and etched their courage into the depths of the ocean and the annals of history. As the flames and smoke rose from the Mississinawa, Nishina allowed himself a final glance at the horizon, the faint silver light of dawn mingling with the orange glow of fire. He breathed deeply, feeling both the finality of the moment and the continuation of legacy. The ocean would remember, the submarine crew would remember, and someday, the world would remember the silent sacrifices made beneath the waves. And for Nishina, alone in the cockpit, the journey through darkness, water, and memory continued a testament to courage, friendship, and the inexorable weight of history. The aftermath of the explosion hung heavy over the Philippine Sea. Smoke and fire from the Mississinawa's hull painted the horizon in angry streaks of orange and black, while the water itself simmered with scattered debris and the remnants of fuel tanks torn open by the blast. The sea, once calm and indifferent, now seemed alive with the echoes of destruction, carrying the distant cries of sailors who had survived the initial shock. Inside the I-47, the submarine crew watched in tense silence. The faces of the men were illuminated by the faint glow of control panels, their expressions a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. They had trained for this moment, briefed on the mission, aware of its stakes, yet the reality of destruction unfolding in the open water before them was almost surreal. Reports crackled over the intercom, some exaggerated, some cautious, all tinged with the uncertainty of what lay beneath the surface. Nishina, still in his chiton, allowed the periscope to rise briefly. The Mississinawa was sinking, a twisted monument to both human ingenuity and sacrifice. The heat from the explosion radiated faintly through the water, a subtle reminder of the sheer magnitude of the detonation. He felt neither triumph nor sorrow, only a profound, quiet gravity, the kind that settles deep in a man's chest when he understands the full weight of history. Memories of the pilots who had perished haunted him. Hiroshi Kuroki, the others who had been caught in nets, those lost to depth charges, their faces flickered in his mind, as vivid as if they were beside him in the cockpit. He whispered their names, letting the sound dissolve into the hum of the chiton, a private ceremony of remembrance amidst the chaos of war. The submarine crew began relaying tactical observations back to command, reporting what they believed to be multiple successful hits. In reality, Nishina knew only one torpedo had struck true. Yet even this solitary act of precision had changed the landscape of the day, and perhaps, for a moment, the course of history itself. Above, American sailors scrambled across decks, extinguishing fires, rescuing men from the water, and tending to the wounded. The sound of alarm bells and shouted commands filled the air, mingling with the crackle of flames and the groaning of steel. Below, in the silent depths, Nishina maneuvered the Kaiten cautiously, aware that the chaos above could turn against him in an instant. The enemy was alert now, scanning, listening, ready to destroy any further threats. Every movement in the cockpit was deliberate, precise. The slightest miscalculation could mean detection, and detection could mean death. Nishina's mind was calm, yet fully alert, each thought measured, each breath synchronized with the rhythm of the machine and the pulse of the ocean. He allowed himself a fleeting reflection on the sheer bravery of the young men who had volunteered for these missions. Thousands of names and faces, only a handful ever selected, all aware of the fatal stakes, yet undeterred. As the I-47 began to pull away from the site, Nishina observed the aftermath one last time. The water was now dotted with floating wreckage, the silhouettes of smaller debris casting long shadows in the morning light. Smoke plumes twisted and curled skyward, as if the sea itself were mourning the destruction wrought upon it. In this quiet, Nishina felt the full weight of his actions, the responsibilities carried by a single pilot in a small, deadly machine, and the sacrifices made by those who had come before him. The strategic consequences were already becoming apparent. The Japanese command, receiving exaggerated reports of success, felt a surge of hope, planning additional Kaiten missions. The Americans, unaware of the solitary success beneath the waves, would intensify patrols, increase depth charge frequency, and tighten security, inadvertently confirming the effectiveness of the few pilots who had truly struck. Yet the cost of this warfare was staggering. A constant reminder that technological innovation alone could not replace the lives lost in pursuit of strategic advantage. Nishina's thoughts returned once more to Hiroshi Kuroki. He could feel his friend's presence in the cockpit, in the hum of the engine, in the faint vibrations of the water. The urn sat beside him, a silent witness to the culmination of years of planning, testing, and sacrifice. He whispered a final farewell, a promise carried beneath the waves, that their pact had been honored, that their courage had not been in vain. The submarine began its quiet journey back to base, the surface of the sea returning to a deceptive calm. Above, the world seemed unchanged. Yet the currents had shifted, lives had been lost, and a small, determined crew of men had etched their story into the history of the war. For Nishina, the day was both an end and a beginning. The end of a mission, the fulfillment of a promise, and the beginning of a legacy that would be remembered quietly beneath the waves, in the minds of those who knew the true cost of honor and courage. The ocean had returned to a deceptive calm, its surface a mirror of the morning sky. But beneath, the memory of explosions, fire, and steel lingered in the currents. For Nishina, the mission was complete, yet the echoes of sacrifice and duty would remain with him forever. Back aboard the I-47, the crew worked quietly, repairing minor damages, adjusting gauges, and checking communications. Their eyes, however, constantly flicked to the horizon, where smoke still rose faintly from the Mississauga's remains. Though the immediate danger had passed, the weight of what had been done hung over them like a persistent shadow. Nishina remained in the cockpit of the Kaiten, allowing himself a few moments to reflect. He thought of the young pilots who had trained under him, and Kuroki, their eager faces, their courage, and their ultimate fate. Each one represented a choice, a willingness to face death for something larger than themselves. The numbers were staggering. Over 100 men, only a handful ever succeeding. Hundreds lost to the indifferent sea, to nets, to depth charges, to miscalculations. The magnitude of the sacrifice was impossible to fully grasp, yet Nishina carried it in his chest, like a small, beating stone. He recalled the first ceremonies, where the 12 chosen pilots had been celebrated with sake and kachikure, given swords, and sent forward into history with words of honor and promise. Hiroshi's ashes had been carried into the heart of battle, a silent witness to courage, a physical manifestation of friendship that death could not erase. The training grounds on Otsushima, once filled with laughter, argument, and camaraderie, now felt sacred, the birthplace of legends who had already vanished into the depths. As the submarine returned to Japanese waters, Nishina's thoughts turned to the future of the Kaiten program. Commanders, emboldened by reports of success, would send more young men into the sea, each one a precise instrument of destruction, each one walking the fine line between duty and death. The strategic hope was clear: to slow the American advance, to demonstrate the resolve of the Imperial Navy, to strike fear into the enemy. Yet Nishina understood the harsh reality. The chances of success were minimal, the cost unbearably high, and the lessons learned were written in the blood of the young and brave. He allowed himself a moment of quiet sorrow, imagining families left behind, letters unopened, futures erased before they had begun. Every wave against the hull of the submarine seemed to whisper their names, to remind him of the fragility of life, of the fleeting nature of honor, and the inexorable march of history. Nishina thought of the Kaiten Memorial Museum that would one day exist on Otsushima, of the stories that would be told to remember these men, not merely as tools of war, but as individuals, as sons, friends, pilots, engineers, human beings who had chosen courage over survival. He imagined the visitors walking through the exhibits, reading names, seeing photographs, and feeling a connection to lives that had been given in the depths of the ocean. He imagined Hiroshi's name among them, remembered and honored, and he allowed himself the faintest, most private smile. The journey home was quiet, almost surreal. Above, seagulls circled lazily, unaware of the tides of war, of the human drama that had unfolded just below. The water reflected clouds drifting slowly across the sky, peaceful in contrast to the violence that had occurred beneath. Nishina, alone with his thoughts, felt the paradox of the moment, the calm after chaos, the serenity after sacrifice, the persistence of life in the midst of death. He reflected on the lessons of the Kaiten program, the audacity of innovation, the necessity of courage, and the ultimate price that honor could demand. Every young pilot who had boarded the lethal machines had done so with full knowledge of their fate, yet they had proceeded, bound by duty, friendship, and the belief in something larger than themselves. Nishina carried their memory with him as a quiet weight, a constant companion, an invisible chain linking the past, present, and future. As the I-47 approached the safety of friendly waters, Nishina allowed himself one final glance toward the horizon. The sea was vast, beautiful, and merciless. It had claimed lives, tested courage, and witnessed acts of unparalleled bravery. And in its depths, the story of the Kaiten pilots of honor, sacrifice, friendship, and unyielding resolve would live forever, whispered in the currents, remembered in stone, and immortalized in the hearts of those who dared to look beneath the waves. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the deck of the submarine. Nishina exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of survival, of memory, and of legacy. He knew that history would judge them in its own way, indifferent and unyielding. But he also knew that the courage of those beneath the waves, Hiroshi Kuroki and all the others, would endure, quiet, profound, and eternal. And in that knowledge, he found a fragile, sacred peace. The days following the first mission were a mixture of anticipation, grief, and relentless preparation. Reports of exaggerated successes had spread through the Imperial Navy, emboldening commanders to plan further missions. Yet beneath the surface of strategy and planning, Nishina felt a quiet, gnawing unease. He knew the reality that of all the young men sent beneath the waves, only a few would ever reach their targets. The rest would perish, swallowed by the indifferent sea, leaving only the memory of their courage behind. Nishina spent hours in the cockpit of his Kaiten, testing, recalibrating, and refining. Every control, every valve, every instrument demanded precision. The training grounds on Otsushima had been rigorous, but the ocean itself was a far harsher teacher, offering no forgiveness for miscalculations. He could still hear Hiroshi's calm voice during training, urging careful adjustments, reminding him of the importance of subtlety, of patience, of discipline. Now, alone in the cockpit, those words became a lifeline, guiding his hands, steadying his mind. The second wave of missions commenced, with young pilots boarding the lethal craft with quiet determination. Each launch was a moment of silent dread, the submarine crews watching with respect and fear as the Kaiten slipped into the depths. Some returned damaged, some never returned at all. The ocean claimed them, leaving only the faintest disturbances on its surface and the memories etched into the hearts of those who remained. Nishina reflected on the purpose of their sacrifice. The Kaiten was not a conventional weapon. It was a manifestation of desperation, innovation, and the unyielding drive of a nation facing impossible odds. Its success was measured not in the number of ships destroyed, but in the courage it demanded, the willingness to confront death directly, and the symbolic weight it carried in a war that seemed increasingly unwinnable. He spent long nights staring at the urn of Hiroshi Kuroki, feeling the presence of his friend in the dim light of the cockpit. The war had forced them to convert friendship into strategy, loyalty into lethal precision, and memory into motivation. Each mission, each movement beneath the waves, became a testament not just to skill, but to the human capacity to find purpose amidst devastation. The sea itself seemed to respond to these thoughts. Currents whispered, waves shifted, and the dark depths seemed to pulse with life, indifferent yet responsive. Nishina often paused in the cockpit, letting the hum of the engine and the distant movements of the ocean fill his senses, grounding him in the present, even as memories of the past pressed upon him. He recalled the faces of the volunteers' young men who had boarded the chitons with quiet dignity, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, determination, and a strange serenity. They had trained for months, learning to operate machines that were both weapon and coffin, mastering the delicate balance of navigation, timing, and explosive power. Yet no manual could prepare them for the emotional weight, the isolation, the knowledge that every mission was likely their last. As more missions were launched, the human cost became starkly evident. Reports filtered back of chitons lost to torpedo nets, depth charges, mechanical failure, or simply the unforgiving pressure of the ocean. Few had succeeded, and the disparity between expectation and reality weighed heavily on Nishina. The lessons were clear, yet bitter. Technology could not replace courage, and courage often demanded the ultimate price. In quiet moments, Nishina allowed himself to imagine an alternate world, a world where the war had been different, where Hiroshi and the other pilots had survived, where innovation and bravery could coexist with life rather than sacrifice. But the ocean, the machine, and the mission offered no such comfort. He could only proceed, honoring the memory of those who had fallen, the bonds that had been forged, and the ideals that had driven them beneath the waves. Strategic discussions on the surface were starkly different from the silent reality beneath. Commanders debated numbers, outcomes, and tactical advantages, unaware of the emotional cost carried by each pilot. For Nishina, every decision, every maneuver, every adjustment in the cockpit was a negotiation with mortality itself, a delicate dance between precision, courage, and fate. The final missions of the year approached. Winter winds swept over the Philippine Sea, churning waves into frothy white peaks, while the sun barely pierced the dense morning fog. Nishina prepared his chiton with meticulous care, checking each instrument, adjusting valves, and ensuring that the deadly payload was aligned perfectly. The weight of memory pressed upon him, Hiroshi's ashes, the faces of the fallen, the hopes of those who had entrusted him with their legacy. Every motion of the torpedo became an act of devotion, every breath a silent vow that the sacrifices of the past would not be forgotten. And yet, amidst the tension and the deadly precision, Nishina found moments of fragile clarity. He could feel the rhythm of the ocean, the pulse of the machine, and the invisible threads of human courage that linked him to all who had gone before. The war, the destruction, the explosions, they were monumental, but the quiet persistence of memory, honor, and friendship endured even in the darkest depths. As the submarine crew launched the final chitons of the year, Nishina allowed himself a fleeting private thought, that though the missions were perilous, Though the odds were merciless, though the ocean had claimed so many, the courage of the pilots, their unwavering commitment to duty, honor, and friendship would endure forever. And beneath the waves, in the quiet hum of the Kiten's engine, in the pressure of the deep and the memory of those lost, Nishina carried that truth silently, unwaveringly, eternally. The sea had grown calm once more, the morning light spilling silver across the gentle waves, yet the events of the past weeks lingered like shadows beneath the surface. The I-47 returned to base, its crew silent, introspective, carrying both pride and grief. They had witnessed acts of courage unlike any other, seen young men board vessels designed for their deaths, and watched the sea claim them with indifferent precision. For Nishina, the relief of survival was entwined with a profound weight, the memory of Hiroshi Kuroki, the other pilots, and the stark reality of what had been lost. In Tokyo, military reports painted a glowing picture. Exaggerated accounts of the Kiten attacks were delivered to high command, emphasizing supposed successes and inspiring optimism amidst an increasingly grim war effort. Official documents failed to account for the true cost. The majority of the pilots had perished. Many missions had ended in failure, and the effectiveness of the weapon was far less than projected. Yet even this misinformation served a purpose. It boosted morale, justified continued production, and sustained the belief in innovation despite the mounting losses. Across the Pacific, American forces responded with increasing vigilance. Depth charges became more frequent, patrols more aggressive, and sonar sweeps more thorough. While few Kitens ever reached their targets, the threat itself forced strategic adjustments, demanding more resources, attention, and caution from the U.S. Navy. The psychological impact, subtle but profound, was an unspoken legacy of the courage and sacrifice of these young pilots. Back on the I-47, the crew grappled with the human side of these operations. Each man had observed the terror, skill, and determination of the Kiten pilots. Though many were trained for conventional naval combat, witnessing comrades navigate death so intimately left a mark impossible to erase. The submarine itself, a vessel of war, became a floating memorial, each corridor and compartment echoing with the silent memories of those who had given everything. Nishina spent long hours in reflection, revisiting the sites of missions in his mind. The Mississauga, burning and sinking in his memory, was more than a target. It was a symbol of precision, commitment, and the ultimate price of duty. He thought of Hiroshi repeatedly, of their shared dreams, plans, and the pact that had carried them through both training and tragedy. The urn remained beside him in the cockpit, a tangible reminder of friendship, sacrifice, and the enduring power of memory. The Japanese press, censored and propagandized, celebrated the missions as heroic demonstrations of resolve. Families received letters, often vague or incomplete, the true nature of their son's fate obscured beneath layers of honorific language. Nishina understood the cruelty of this necessity, the delicate balance between truth and morale, between remembrance and propaganda. He felt the weight of each report, each ceremony, each official message, recognizing that the human cost was far deeper than anyone would publicly acknowledge. For the American side, The attack on the Mississinawa and the threat of further kaitens became a case study in undersea warfare. Naval officers analyzed the missions, the potential for manned torpedoes, and the implications for fleet security. Though largely ineffective in the long term, the Kaiten program highlighted vulnerabilities, sparked innovations in sonar technology, and influenced defensive protocols for the remainder of the war. The unseen courage of the Japanese pilots thus left an indelible mark, not just through destruction, but through the evolution of naval strategy. Nishina also observed the psychological aftermath among the surviving submarine crew. Though stoic on the surface, each man carried unspoken tension, haunted by the knowledge that they had delivered friends into death with their own hands, that they had released the kaitens into an ocean that demanded everything. The burden of survival was not pride alone, but responsibility. Responsibility for memory, for honor, and for ensuring that the sacrifices were never forgotten. As the I-47 docked and the pilots disembarked for rest, Nishina took a moment to walk along the deck, letting the salty air wash over him. The sun reflected off the calm waters, a deceptive serenity masking the horrors beneath. He thought of the Kaiten Memorial Museum that would someday exist on Otsushima, of the young men whose names would be etched into stone, and of the silent lessons carried forward through generations. This was the true legacy of the Kaiten, not in the few ships destroyed, but in the courage displayed, the innovation attempted, and the unyielding devotion to duty. In quiet reflection, Nishina allowed himself a fleeting smile, tempered by sorrow. History would judge, wars would continue, and nations would rise and fall. Yet in the deep, shadowed waters of the Philippine Sea, the acts of bravery, the pacts of friendship, and the quiet, unwavering honor of these men endured. Beneath the waves, in the metal hulls of the machines they piloted, and in the hearts of those who survived to remember, the Kaiten pilots remained immortal. And for Nishina, as he finally stepped off the submarine and into the embrace of the air above, there was a moment of fragile, sacred peace. A recognition that while the ocean claimed bodies, it could never claim memory, courage, or the eternal bond forged in the depths. The months following the first mission became a steady rhythm of preparation, tension, and sacrifice. Nishina watched as young pilots trained tirelessly, their dedication unwavering despite the deadly odds. Each man understood the gravity of the Kaiten, the inevitability of its purpose, and the fleeting chance of survival. The submarine docks became both workshops and memorials, filled with the echoes of laughter, discipline, and whispered farewells. The final missions approached under increasingly grim circumstances. Supplies were limited, enemy patrols intensified, and the tactical advantage of the Kaitens diminished with every deployment. Yet the pilots, resolute and undeterred, continued their work, propelled by duty, honor, and the memory of those who had come before. Nishina prepared meticulously, knowing that any mistake could mean disaster not only for the mission, but for the legacy of every man who had ever stepped into a Kaiten. As the first waves of winter approached, the sea became unforgiving. Storms swept across the Philippine Sea, churning waves into mountainous peaks, tossing the small submarines like toys in a relentless tide. Under these conditions, the missions became even more perilous. Depths were harder to navigate, visibility reduced, and every movement demanded absolute precision. Nishina often paused in the cockpit, feeling the hum of the engine, the cold of the metal, and the steady presence of Hiroshi's ashes beside him. The memory of his friend was a constant, quiet companion, a reminder of sacrifice, of courage, and of the invisible threads that tied all these young pilots together. The Kaiten, lethal yet fragile, felt almost alive in these moments, a silent partner in their mission, a vessel of both destruction and remembrance. The final missions of the program were launched with an almost ceremonial gravity. Each pilot entered the cockpit with solemn determination, aware that few would survive, yet committed to honoring their comrades and fulfilling the pact of courage that bound them together. Some missions ended in failure, lost to the merciless ocean, depth charges, or mechanical failures. Others reached their targets, delivering destruction but at the cost of life that could never be measured in strategy or reports. Nishina, overseeing these operations, felt the duality of pride and grief. He admired the courage, precision, and discipline of the pilots, while mourning the inevitable losses. The Kaiten was a symbol of both ingenuity and desperation, a manifestation of the extreme circumstances of war and a testament to the human capacity for courage in the face of certainty. In quiet moments between deployments, Nishina reflected on the lessons learned. The ocean was indifferent, technology was limited, and courage was both necessary and fragile. He thought of Hiroshi, of the young men lost in nets, trapped by depth charges, or claimed by the unforgiving pressure of the sea. He thought of their families, of the letters never sent, and of the silent grief that would follow in the wake of every mission. By the end of the Kaiten program, the numbers were stark. Over 100 young men had sacrificed their lives, with only a handful achieving their objectives. The program's strategic impact was limited, yet its human and psychological impact resonated across both the Imperial Navy and the American forces. The courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice of these pilots would endure in memory, in history, and in the silent depths of the sea. Nishina spent the final hours of the program in meditation, alone with the hum of the Kaiten and the memory of his fallen comrades. He traced the paths of each mission in his mind, remembering successes, failures, and the unwavering determination of the men who had carried their duties to the ultimate end. He reflected on the fragile nature of life, the weight of honor, and the permanence of memory, realizing that even in death, courage could create a legacy beyond the limits of time. As the last Kaiten was decommissioned, Nishina stood on the deck of the I-47, looking out over the Philippine Sea. The water reflected the shifting clouds, serene and indifferent, yet holding the stories of hundreds of men who had passed beneath its waves. He allowed himself a moment of silence, honoring their sacrifice, their courage, and the bond that had united them in life and death. The Kaiten program had ended, but its legacy endured in memorials on Otsushima, in the stories whispered among sailors, and in the quiet memory of those who had survived to remember. Nishina understood that history would judge the program in its own way, detached and indifferent. But he also knew that the truth of courage, friendship, and sacrifice would never fade. And as the sun rose higher, casting warm light across the calm sea, Nishina felt a profound, sacred peace. He had honored his friend Hiroshi, the pilots who had fallen, and the ideals that had driven them beneath the waves. Though the world would continue to move forward, the echoes of their courage would remain eternal, whispered in the currents, remembered in stone, and carried forever in the hearts of those who dared to witness. Years had passed since the final Kaiten mission, yet the memory of the Philippine Sea, of fire and smoke, of courage and sacrifice, remained vivid in Nishina's mind. The war had ended, the world had shifted, and Japan had been forced to reckon with both defeat and the heavy toll of conflict. The Kaiten program, once a symbol of desperate innovation, was now a chapter of history, studied in silence, remembered quietly, and honored by those who understood the human cost behind every machine. Nishina walked the grounds of the Kaiten Memorial Museum on Otsushima, now a place of reflection, remembrance, and solemn respect. Photographs, letters, and artifacts told the story of hundreds of young men who had volunteered to face death beneath the waves. Urns, small personal belongings, and portraits captured the humanity behind the statistics. The faces of sons, friends, and pilots who had given everything for a sense of duty, honor, and national pride. He paused before the display dedicated to Hiroshi Kuroki, the friend who had first inspired the idea of a manned torpedo. The urn of ashes, the carefully preserved cockpit controls, and the hand-drawn schematics spoke volumes about courage, friendship, and devotion to a cause greater than oneself. Nishina traced the name, feeling the weight of memory, the invisible bond that had endured death, time, and history itself. The historical consequences of the Kaiten program were complex. From a strategic perspective, the missions had limited effectiveness. Only a handful of ships had ever been struck. Yet the psychological impact was undeniable. American naval strategy shifted, defensive measures intensified, and the very idea of human-piloted torpedoes left an imprint on naval history that would echo for decades. For the Japanese Navy, the program remained a testament to courage under impossible odds, a symbol of innovation, and a somber reminder of the price paid for honor. Nishina reflected on the lives lost, on the young men who had willingly embraced death to serve a vision of duty and loyalty. Their sacrifice, often misunderstood or overlooked in the larger scope of history, held a profound significance for those who remembered. He walked slowly, absorbing the quiet weight of the museum, the soft murmur of visitors, the subtle reflection of sunlight on polished wood and glass. Each display was a story, each photograph a voice from the past, and each artifact a silent testament to the cost of courage. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, calm and indifferent, a mirror to the sky. Nishina could almost hear the hum of the Kaiten engines, feel the presence of his friend beside him, and sense the lives that had intersected in that brief, intense chapter of history. The sea had claimed bodies, but it could not claim memory, honor, or the enduring bond of friendship that had inspired the ultimate sacrifice. Nishina often thought of what life might have been if Hiroshi and the other pilots had survived. Would they have returned to ordinary lives, families, and peaceful routines? Or would the weight of what they had witnessed beneath the waves have followed them forever, an invisible scar marking both courage and tragedy? He understood that some questions had no answer, some losses could never be replaced, and some acts of bravery existed only in memory and legend. As the years continued, Nishina dedicated himself to preserving the story of the Kaiten pilots. He shared accounts of the missions, the sacrifices, and the human stories behind the steel and explosives. He spoke not of glory alone, but of courage, friendship, and the profound responsibility that comes with wielding power and knowledge. He emphasized remembrance over triumph, understanding over propaganda, and the importance of honoring those who had given everything for a fleeting chance at duty and purpose. In quiet evenings, Nishina would sometimes return to the water. He would watch the sunset over the horizon, the waves gently lapping against the shore, and imagine the brave men beneath the surface, still racing toward their targets, still carrying the ideals that had defined them. Though decades had passed, the ocean and the memory of those who had faced it so bravely remained eternal. The Kaiten program, while a footnote in the vast history of war, had left an indelible mark on those who experienced it: the survivors, the families, the strategists, and those who later studied its lessons. Its legacy was not measured in destroyed ships or military victories, but in courage, ingenuity, sacrifice, and the human capacity to confront impossible odds with unwavering resolve. For Nishina, the story had always been personal. It was about friendship, loss, and memory. It was about Hiroshi, the pilots, and the invisible threads that bound them together. And it was about honor, quiet, enduring, and unyielding, carried beneath the waves, into history, and into the hearts of all who remembered. And in the stillness of the evening, as the last light of day shimmered on the waters, Nishina allowed himself a moment of peace. The sacrifices were not forgotten. The courage was eternal. The memory of the Kaiten pilots of honor, friendship, and unwavering bravery would endure forever, whispered in the currents, preserved in stone, and carried silently by those who bore witness.